I got started in media incredibly early. I was precocious, and actually at the age of 10 I started writing for our then local newspaper, not unlike the Oklahoman, called the Yorkshire Post. And they had a junior post on Saturdays, and I used to write essays for them. And through that I learned I liked being paid for writing, and I enjoyed the process. And I loved reading newspapers, magazines, whatever came in the house. I would long to read. Sunday mornings I skipped up to the newsagent to buy comics and women's magazines. And so looking back, it was inevitable that I would go into the media.
And I know there are a lot of people in here who also work in the media, marketing, PR, tech world, digital world, and I know how challenging it is. It is really quite extraordinary.
When I left university, where I studied English and American Studies, I got a job as a graduate trainee at a magazine called The Spectator, and there I got to sample every part of living and working in a magazine, and it felt like we were living there. It was in a little house, and I worked on editorial, I worked on circulation, I worked on advertising, so I got a real sense of what a magazine organic system was like, and I absolutely loved it. And from there I went into news, and I worked on newspapers. I worked on the Daily Telegraph, the Guardian, and the Guardian eventually posted me to New York, which is why I'm here in America, even though I don't have an American accent.
And I thought I would talk more specifically about how you manage your career and your life in this extraordinary period of change.
Well, now I tell people I'm a storyteller, because I feel that I tell stories no longer just in print, but in digital media and on television. I'm the executive producer of a show called The Bold Type, which is on ABC's Freeform, just started its third season, and it's really a story about three female friends who work at a magazine, loosely based on Cosmopolitan, which I edited, and it's enormous fun. So there are three young characters in their 20s, which were based on, some of them based on my diaries that I kept at the time, and my best friend, the two of us were journalists together at the Daily Telegraph, and then there's a character more loosely based on me when I started editing Cosmo.
Paying attention to how much time did you spend on your screen this week? Easy to do now that Apple and Samsung.
It's impossible to know what's next. I think the key is to be really paying attention to how people communicate. And I think I'm happy to sit on the board of Snapchat. And I've been involved in the company for nearly 6 years now. And when I realized how that made people feel, the silly pictures, the images going back and forth, and I watched the fun that people were having on it, I knew immediately that this was a new kind of communication tool. It's a new kind of expression using video images. And you suddenly realize the speed with which we communicate has gotten much faster. It's much easier to send a picture of yourself or a short video of yourself pulling silly faces or with your eyes rolling or whatever to indicate how you're feeling than it is to write out a text or write out an email. And so I think wherever we're headed, it will be extremely image-based. And it reminds me of that Gary Steingart novel, Super Sad Love Story, I think it's called, where they keep saying it's got sort of Soviet overtones. And they say, you can now revert to images, you can now revert to images. And it feels like we're going to have a much more image-driven future. And actually, if you look at the newsletter that the Washington Post puts out every day now, it's all image-led. So it's sort of 6 or 7 superb images with a small headline, as opposed to the very dense text actually on, say, the New York Times briefing that you get for the phone. So obviously our media is going to be all about the phone, and it's all going to be about images, and images, I think, will lead our communication. I don't think journalism's dying at all. We just had the Pulitzer Prize earlier this week, and acknowledging enormously valuable work by journalists across the country. The challenge is the business of journalism. There's no shortage of people that want to go into journalism. Everybody now, every citizen, every American citizen is in a way a journalist, because everybody now has a cell phone. So you can take a picture, you can post it to Twitter or Instagram or Snap, and suddenly you are a journalist because you're getting your story out into the world. So I think journalism is changing. I think think the business faces enormous difficulties. I think the pure play digital companies like BuzzFeed that came along and Refinery29 are much more challenged than they thought they were going to be in the business sense. And it's a complicated time, but journalism isn't going away. People have always told stories, and you have to remember, you know, when the printing press came along and people learned that you could share written documents, everybody said, well, this is a disaster, it's the end of civilization, people won't speak to each other anymore. We haven't stopped talking, we haven't stopped telling stories. We're telling more stories than ever, we're telling better stories. You couldn't have better drama on television than you have at the moment. And it's just more challenging to figure out how to make the major profits that people once made from it. And there are many more places to tell these stories.
To get a bead on some of the changes that are going on right now.
I will be talking today in Oklahoma City about the challenges that marketers face in the media these days. I'll be talking about how to look for change and how to pay attention to what's going on around you. We hear a lot about data analytics. I am a big believer in people keeping data on their own behavior, because through that you can figure out often where the next trend is coming, because often you'll be part of it. So if you're a millennial or you're a Gen Z and you're wondering what the changes are in the media, pay attention to your own behavior and compare it to an older sibling. I have two young adult sons. One of them is 3 years younger than his older brother, and his digital media habits are really different to his older brother's. Even in 3 years, there was a sort of generational shift in media usage. So I would say pay attention to what you do and then extrapolate from that what you think the new trends may be. Well, I'm very much hoping that we get season 4 for The Bold Type. I have a show in development with the great Larry Wilmore, who developed The Office, was an executive producer of The Office, and of course Issa Rae's Insecure on HBO, based on a book I wrote last year called Love Rules. It's a relationship drama, which we're just going through the pilot episode at the moment. And I've just inked a deal, as they say in Hollywood, with ABC Studios to develop more shows. So I'm very excited about that.